The moment I turned my motorcycle back towards the girl, the bike was thrown sideways so violently that I hit the road before I even understood what had happened. When I looked up, bleeding and unable to move properly, the girl was gone. So were the goats. There was no path, no wall high enough to hide them, and no time for them to disappear. My name is Nadeem, and this happened to me on a lonely road in Punjab, Pakistan. Even now, years later, I cannot explain what I saw that day, or why the accident happened at the exact moment I decided to turn back. It had been an ordinary journey. I was riding home from a small village in the late afternoon, hoping to arrive before sunset. The road was narrow and quiet, with fields stretching across both sides. Warm air struck my face, dust clung to my clothes, and the steady sound of the motorcycle engine was the only thing breaking the silence. I had traveled that way before. Nothing about the road felt dangerous until the fields slowly gave way to old graves. First, I noticed them on the left, scattered behind a low, broken boundary wall. A few moments later, graves appeared on the right as well. The road passed directly between two sections of an old cemetery. That was where I saw her. A young woman stood near the roadside with several goats around her. She wore a faded shalwar kameez and held a thin wooden stick in one hand. Her head was partly covered, and from a distance, she looked like any village girl grazing animals. At first, I paid little attention. Then I noticed the goats. Not one of them moved when they heard my motorcycle approaching. They did not raise their heads. They did not step away from the road. The girl remained still as well, facing slightly towards the graves. As I passed, she slowly turned her face towards me. Her eyes followed me. I continued riding, but the image stayed in my mint. After a short distance, curiosity overcame common sense. I slowed the motorcycle. Then I looked into the mirror. The road behind me appeared empty. For a few seconds, I kept staring into the mirror, expecting the girl or one of the goats to reappear. Nothing did. The road curved gently behind me, and from where I had stopped, I could see almost the entire stretch I had just crossed. There were no trees thick enough to hide anyone, no houses, no side road, and no movement near the graveyard walls. I told myself I had simply gone too far for the mirror to catch her. That explanation should have been enough. It was not. I let the engine idle and looked ahead. The safer choice was obvious. I could continue home, forget the strange stillness of the goats, and never think about the girl again. Instead, a foolish thought entered my mind. Perhaps she had noticed me looking at her. Perhaps she was still standing there, watching to see whether I would turn back. At the time, it felt like harmless curiosity. Looking back now, I remember it as the exact moment the road changed. I checked for traffic. There was none. Then I moved towards the center and began turning the motorcycle around. As the front wheel angled across the road, the sound of the engine seemed to become strangely distant. The wind dropped. Even the birds in the fields had gone quiet. I paused halfway through the turn. The graveyard now faced me from both sides. On the left, several graves leaned beneath dry weeds. On the right, a broken wall opened towards a narrow strip of earth between the stones. I had crossed that place only seconds earlier, yet it suddenly looked unfamiliar. Then I saw movement near the far end of the wall. A pale shape slipped out of sight. I tightened my grip on the handlebars. "Hello?" I called, feeling ridiculous as soon as the word left my mouth. There was no answer. A soft, metallic sound came from somewhere ahead. One small bell, then another. The sound was faint, but it was moving towards me. I completed the turn and left. Instead, I leaned forward, trying to see beyond the broken wall. That was when something struck the front of the motorcycle. There was no person in the road, no animal, no stone large enough to explain it. The handlebars twisted out of my hands, and the bike dropped beneath me with such force that the sky disappeared. My shoulder hit first, then my face. And just before everything went silent, I heard a young woman laugh beside my ear. For several seconds, I could not breathe. Pain traveled from my shoulder into my neck, and the left side of my face burned against the road. The motorcycle lay a few feet away with its rear wheel still turning. I kept my eyes closed, not because of the pain, because I was afraid that if I opened them, she would be standing beside me. The laugh had been too close. It had not come from the graveyard wall or the field beyond it. I had heard it directly beside my ear, soft and amused, as though someone had watched me fall exactly as they expected. When I finally looked, the road was empty. I tried to push myself upright, but my right palm slipped in the dust. The skin had torn badly, and blood ran between my fingers. My knee felt as if something inside it had shifted. "Is anyone there?" I called. My voice sounded weak in the open space. No answer came. The silence had changed. Before the crash, it had felt empty. Now it felt occupied. I forced myself onto one elbow and looked towards the broken section of wall. The girl was not there. Neither were the goats. I could see the entire roadside clearly. Beyond the wall were graves, dry weeds, and a flat piece of ground stretching towards the fields. There was nowhere for several animals to hide, and not enough time for them to have moved far. Then I noticed something beside my left hand. A small hoof print pressed into the dust. It was fresh and sharply defined. Another appeared a little farther away. Then another. The prints crossed the road in a straight line, passing directly in front of the fallen motorcycle. But they did not continue towards the field. They ended at the center of the road. I stared at the final mark until a cold feeling spread through my chest. A bell rang behind me. Only once. I turned too quickly, and pain shot through my ribs. Nothing stood there. The motorcycle engine coughed. Ed then stopped. For the first time since the fall, the road became completely silent. Then, from somewhere inside the graveyard, I heard the wooden tap of a shepherd's stick against stone. One step. A pause. Then another. Coming closer. The tapping stopped just beyond the broken wall. I held my breath and listened. Nothing moved among the graves, but I could still feel someone standing there, hidden by the low stones and dry weeds. My body told me to stay down. Every instinct I had told me not to look. Then a goat bleated. The sound came from so close that I flinched. I turned towards the center of the road. One of the goats was standing there. It had not walked into view. One moment the road had been empty, and the next it was directly in front of me, staring with pale, unblinking eyes. A small brass bell hung from its neck. The animal did not lower its head or shift its weight. Its chest did not appear to move. I whispered, "Go away." Its ears twitched. Behind it, another goat appeared near the opposite wall. Then a third. They emerged one by one without sound, taking positions across the road until they formed a loose line between me and the motorcycle. The girl was not among them. I dragged myself backwards, using one heel and my uninjured hand. Gravel cut through my clothes, but I barely felt it. The first goat stepped forward. Its bell remained silent. That frightened me more than the movement. I reached for a stone and threw it towards the animal. The stone struck the road beside its front leg. The goat did not react. Instead, every animal turned its head at the same moment and looked towards the graveyard. The tapping began again. Closer now. Wood against stone. Tap. Pause. Tap. A shadow moved behind the broken wall. I saw the top of a wooden stick first, then a hand curled around it. The fingers were dusty and unnaturally pale. The girl slowly stepped into view. Her shawl covered most of her face, but I knew it was her. She stood on the other side of the goats, watching me through the gap between them. "You came back," she said. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. I tried to answer, but my throat had tightened. She tilted her head. "I thought you would." The goats began moving towards me. Not quickly, not angrily, one careful step at a time. I looked at the motorcycle lying beyond them and realized the only way out was through the graveyard. So I turned, forced myself onto my injured knee, and crawled towards the broken wall. Behind me, the bells finally began to ring.
Before we continue, a quick note. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment. However, the historical reference mentioned here is real. Miani Sahib Cemetery in Lahore, Punjab is one of Pakistan's oldest and largest cemeteries, with a history dating back to the Mughal era. The facts about its history and significance are based on publicly available historical sources. Everything else in this story, including the characters, events, conversations, and paranormal elements, is entirely fictional and should not be taken as documented fact. Now, let's return to the story.
The bells rang behind me as I dragged myself through the broken wall. Dry weeds scratched my arms. My injured knee buckled beneath me, and for one terrible second, I thought I would collapse between the graves. I did not look back. The ground inside the cemetery was uneven, packed with loose soil and stones. Some graves had small brick borders. Others were nothing more than raised mounds covered in grass. I moved between them as quickly as I could, using the grave markers to pull myself forward. The bells followed. Not all at once. One would ring to my left, another would answer from behind. Then a third would sound somewhere ahead. I stopped. The road was no longer visible from where I crouched. The broken wall stood only a short distance behind me, yet the cemetery seemed to stretch much farther than it had from the roadside. Rows of graves continued into the fading light. I turned slowly, searching for the opening. There was no opening. The wall now looked complete. I stared at it, unable to understand what I was seeing. I had crawled through a gap wide enough for a person, but the bricks behind me were unbroken, dark with age, and covered in thorny vines. A bell rang beside my right shoulder. I spun around. A goat stood between two graves. Its pale eyes reflected the last light of the sky. The brass bell beneath its throat swung gently, though the animal itself remained still. Then the girl's voice came from somewhere beyond it. "You should have kept riding." I forced myself to stand, leaning against a grave marker. "What do you want?" The goat stepped aside. The girl was sitting on the edge of a grave several meters away, her wooden stick resting across her knees. Her shawl had slipped back. Her face looked young, but something about it was wrong. The skin around her eyes seemed darker, as though she had not slept in years. I didn't eat. "All you," she said. I looked around at the silent graves. "Then why am I here?" She raised one hand and pointed behind me. "You turned when it called." A low sound moved beneath the ground. Not a voice. Not an animal. Something deep and heavy, traveling under the graves like a slow breath. The soil near my feet lifted slightly, then sank. The girl stood. For the first time, fear appeared on her face. "Do not let it hear you running," she whispered. The ground moved again. A thin crack opened between two graves, no wider than a finger. Dust spilled into it, followed by small stones, then the edge of a dried leaf. The sound beneath us deepened, slow and uneven, like something turning in its sleep. The girl lifted one finger to her lips. I stayed pressed against the grave marker, barely breathing. One of the goats stepped between us and lowered its head towards the crack. Its bell gave a faint tremble, but no sound came from it. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then something knocked from below. 3 heavy strikes. The goat jerked backwards. The girl gripped her wooden stick with both hands. "Walk," she whispered. "Do not run." "Where?" She pointed towards a narrow path between the graves. I could not see where it led. The light was fading fast, and the rows of stones seemed to lean towards one another. I took one step. Pain shot through my knee, forcing a breath from my mouth. The soil beneath the nearest grave shifted. The girl's eyes widened. Quiet. Another knock came from below, this time directly under my injured foot. I moved again, slower now. The goats spread around me, forming a strange moving circle. Their bodies brushed past the graves without touching them, and each time the ground stirred, one of them stopped and faced it. The girl walked behind us. I wanted to ask who she was. I wanted to ask what lived beneath that place. But every question felt dangerous. The path narrowed until the graves stood close enough for my shoulders to scrape against their brick edges. Ahead, I finally saw a break in the wall and the gray strip of road beyond it. My motorcycle was still lying where I had fallen. For the first time, I believed I might escape. Then, a voice came from beneath the grave beside me. Nadeem. I froze. The voice sounded exactly like my mother. Nadeem, help me. My chest tightened before my mind could catch up. My mother was miles away. She could not be under the ground. The girl seized my wrist. Her hand was ice cold. Whatever voice it uses, she whispered, do not answer. Behind us, the earth split open with a wet, tearing sound. The goats scattered. The girl shoved me towards the road. Now, she said. Run. The first step nearly brought me down. My injured knee folded, and I caught myself on the edge of a grave as the soil behind us gave way. A sound rose from the opening, not a roar, but a long breath drawn through wet earth. The girl pulled me upright. Keep moving. We ran between the graves. The goats moved with us now, no longer silent. Their bells rang wildly as they crossed the narrow path, each note sharp enough to hurt. Behind us, something heavy pushed through the ground, following the sound of our feet. My mother's voice called again. Nadeem, wait. I bit the inside of my cheek and kept going. The opening in the wall was only a few meters away when the path shifted beneath me. One of the graves collapsed at the edge, exposing a dark hollow under the bricks. A hand reached out. It was gray with soil, the fingers too long, the nails packed with mud. I stumbled back. The girl struck it with her wooden stick. The hand disappeared into the darkness, and the ground beneath us shuddered. Go, she shouted. I crossed through the broken wall and fell onto the road. The air changed instantly. Wind struck my face. Somewhere far away, a bird cried over the fields. The ordinary sounds of evening returned so suddenly that I almost believed I had imagined everything. Then the girl stepped through behind me. She looked towards the fallen motorcycle. You have to start it before the bells stop. I crawled to the bike, lifted it with both arms, and nearly screamed from the pain in my shoulder. Petrol dripped from beneath the engine. The handlebar was twisted, but the ignition key was still in place. I pressed the starter. Nothing. Behind me, the bells rang faster. I tried again. The engine coughed once, then died. The girl stood beside the road, facing the graveyard. The goats formed a line around her. The ground under the wall began to rise. Not bras, rise, as though something enormous was pressing its back against the earth. The bells slowed, one by one. I kicked the starter with my good leg. The engine came alive. The girl turned towards me. For the first time, I saw blood running from beneath her shawl. Do not look into your mirror, she said. Then the last bell stopped. I did not look into the mirror. I pushed the motorcycle forward, forcing it to stay upright as the damaged handlebar pulled to one side. The road stretched ahead in the last gray light of evening, empty except for dust rising beneath the tires. Behind me, something struck the graveyard wall. Bricks cracked. The girl shouted a word I could not understand, and the goats began bleating all at once. I kept my eyes ahead. The engine struggled, then caught properly. I accelerated despite the pain tearing through my shoulder and knee. The cemetery slipped behind me, but the air remained cold against my back. Then I felt weight settle on the seat. Someone was sitting behind me. I could feel their knees close to my sides. A hand touched my injured shoulder with almost no pressure. My body locked. The girl's warning returned to me. Do not look into your mirror. The motorcycle moved faster. A voice leaned close to my ear. Nadeem. It was my mother again. I gripped the handlebar until blood reopened across my palm. The voice changed. It became the girl's. You came back for me. I said nothing. The weight remained there for another few seconds, then vanished so suddenly that the motorcycle swerved. I fought for control and continued until the graves were no longer visible. Lights appeared ahead. A tractor approached from the opposite direction, and the driver slowed when he saw the state of me. He helped me off the motorcycle and called 2 men from a nearby farmhouse. They asked what had happened. I told them I had fallen. I did not mention the girl. While one of them cleaned the blood from my face, the older man examined my motorcycle. He crouched near the front wheel and pulled something loose from the mudguard. A small brass bell. Its strap was stained dark and a piece of faded cloth was caught beneath the buckle. Do you keep goats? He asked. No. He looked back towards the road I had come from. For a moment his face changed. Then he placed the bell on the ground and told me not to touch it. By the time we looked again, it was gone. Years have passed since that evening. My injuries healed, but I have never taken that road again. Sometimes, just before sleep, I hear a bell outside my window. Only once. And whenever it happens, I remember the girl's face, the blood beneath her shawl, and the last thing she said before the bells stopped. I still do not know whether she caused my fall, or whether she was the reason I escaped.